What if I told you the Vietnam War didn't start with American soldiers or helicopters? The real story began much earlier, with a struggle for the very soul of a nation. Forget everything you think you know, because to understand the war, we have to rewind the clock. Long before the first American boot hit the ground, for nearly a century, Vietnam wasn't its own country. It was part of French Indochina, a colony run for the benefit of France. Imagine living in your own home, but someone else collects the rent, tells you what to do, and profits from your labor. That was life for most Vietnamese. They were burdened with heavy taxes, their resources were shipped overseas, and their political freedoms were non-existent. People dreamed of independence, of a day they could call their country their own. But any attempt to rise up was brutally crushed. Freedom felt like an impossible fantasy. But in this climate of oppression, a new kind of leader was forged. A young man, filled with a quiet fire, left Vietnam to see the world. He worked odd jobs in Paris and London, absorbing new ideas about revolution, self-determination, and the hypocrisy of colonial powers. He went by many names, but the one that would echo through history was Ho Chi Minh. After World War I, he saw a glimmer of hope. American President Woodrow Wilson was championing the idea of self-determination for all nations. Ho Chi Minh drafted a petition, a plea for Vietnam's freedom, and tried to deliver it to the world leaders gathered at the Versailles Peace Conference. But his voice was ignored. There's no solid proof his message even reached the president. For Vietnam, nothing changed. This rejection was a pivotal moment. It taught Ho Chi Minh a harsh lesson. Freedom wouldn't be given, it would have to be taken. He realized that begging for independence from the very powers that benefited from its absence was a fool's errand. He turned his attention to a different path: revolution. After decades in exile, honing his skills and building a network, Ho Chi Minh secretly returned to Vietnam in 1941. The world was once again at war. Hiding in the rugged mountains near the Chinese border, he gathered a small group of patriots. They were students, farmers, and intellectuals, all united by a single, powerful idea. Together, they formed the Viet Minh, a revolutionary league whose one and only goal was a free and independent Vietnam. World War II completely upended the situation in Southeast Asia. Japan, seeking to expand its empire, invaded and kicked the French out of power. For the Vietnamese people, it was like trading one master for another, and in many ways, it was worse. The Japanese military seized food supplies and forced farmers to grow industrial crops instead of rice. The consequences were devastating. In 1945, a horrific famine swept through the northern part of the country. Historical studies confirm that a combination of poor wartime policies, forced food requisitions, and a broken transportation system led to the deaths of over 1 million people. In the midst of this unimaginable suffering, the Viet Minh saw an opportunity not just to fight, but to lead. They organized raids on Japanese storehouses, distributing captured rice to starving villagers. They offered protection and a vision for the future. While the Japanese and French authorities failed the people, the Viet Minh stepped into the void, earning trust and support, one village at a time. Their influence grew quietly but powerfully across the countryside. Then, in August 1945, everything changed. Atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Japan surrendered. Suddenly, there was a massive power vacuum in Vietnam. The Japanese were defeated, the French were weakened and not yet back in force. The Allied powers were stretched thin across the globe. Ho Chi Minh recognized this as a once-in-a-lifetime chance. It was now or never. The Viet Minh launched what became known as the August Revolution. Moving with incredible speed, they took control of villages, towns, and major cities, often with little resistance. The momentum was unstoppable. On September 2, 1945, in Hanoi's Ba Dinh Square, Ho Chi Minh stood before a massive crowd and read Vietnam's Declaration of Independence. In a deliberate appeal to the West, he even borrowed phrases directly from the American Declaration, stating, "All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." He hoped for recognition, especially from the United States, a country born from its own anti-colonial revolution. But his hopes were dashed. The world was entering a new era, the Cold War. Washington saw Ho Chi Minh not as a nationalist leader, but as a communist, an agent in a global ideological struggle. The United States, fearing the spread of communism, chose to back its old ally, France. France had no intention of letting go of its prized colony. Negotiations between the French and Ho Chi Minh's new government quickly broke down. The French wanted to restore their empire. The Viet Minh would settle for nothing less than total independence. By the end of 1946, the first shots were fired, and the conflict escalated into the First Indochina War. At first, the United States was not directly involved in the fighting, but behind the scenes, its role was growing. As the Cold War intensified, the domino theory took hold in Washington, the belief that if one country in Southeast Asia fell to communism, its neighbors would quickly follow. So, America began to send money and military equipment to support the French war effort. According to government data, by 1954, the U.S. was footing the bill for nearly 80% of France's war costs. America wasn't fighting yet, but it was bankrolling the war. Meanwhile, the Viet Minh were proving to be a formidable force. They mastered guerrilla warfare, striking from the jungles and disappearing back into the landscape. They had the support of the rural population and received increasing aid from the newly formed People's Republic of China and the Soviet Union. The war dragged on for years, a bloody stalemate. Frustrated and desperate for a decisive victory, the French military leadership devised a bold plan. They decided to set up a massive, fortified airbase deep in a remote valley in northwestern Vietnam. The place was called Dien Bien Phu. The logic was simple. They would lure the Viet Minh into a conventional, set-piece battle. The French, with their superior firepower, artillery, and air support, were confident they could crush the Viet Minh army once and for all. It was meant to be the final war-winning trap. But the French tragically underestimated their enemy. The Viet Minh general, Vo Nguyen Giap, saw the French plan not as a trap, but as an opportunity. He accepted the challenge. In one of the most incredible logistical feats in modern military history, tens of thousands of Vietnamese civilians and soldiers began to do the impossible. They disassembled heavy artillery pieces and dragged them by hand and on bicycles, over mountains and through dense jungle trails that the French believed were impassable. They surrounded the valley, positioning their cannons on the high ground, looking down on the French base. The trap was reversed. In March 1954, the Viet Minh unleashed a shocking, thunderous artillery barrage on Dien Bien Phu. The French were caught completely by surprise. Their airstrip was destroyed, cutting off their main supply line. The siege had begun. For 56 brutal days, the Viet Minh relentlessly attacked the besieged French garrison. The world watched in astonishment as a supposedly primitive guerrilla army systematically dismantled a modern European force. In May 1954, the French surrendered. The defeat at Dien Bien Phu was a stunning blow, not just militarily, but psychologically. It shattered the myth of European colonial invincibility. The fall of Dien Bien Phu marked the end of French rule in Vietnam. It led directly to the Geneva Accords, an international conference that would divide Vietnam into a communist North and an anti-communist South. This division was meant to be temporary, a prelude to a nationwide election to unify the country, but that election would never happen. The stage was now set for a new, even larger conflict. The French were gone, but the struggle for Vietnam was far from over, and a new foreign power, the United States, was about to step into the quagmire, determined to hold the line against communism, whatever the cost. The Vietnam War, as we know it, was about to begin. Thanks for watching. If you found this history interesting, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. See you next time.